Coming up next on the Jeff Crilley Show, you're going to meet the great David Dike. He is a pioneer in fine art in Dallas. You'll hear his journey next.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's icebox.
Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home.
We're talking about anyone with a camcorder like the one I'm using becomes a television network.
We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show.
Well, Dallas-Fort Worth has become known as a mega for fine art, thanks to families like the Bass family, families like the Nash family. How about fine art in your home? That's kind of a tricky game to navigate, but a guy who can be our tour guide today is David Dike. He's been in this industry since 1983. That's amazing.
Long time.
I mean,
yes.
when I say that, do you think to yourself that would feel?
Oh, it seems like yesterday. Yes, yeah. I feel like 40 yeyears just flies by, as you know too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell us about the early days. How did it start?
Well, I was working for a man by the name of Ron Hall, who had a gallery in Fort Worth. He had Hall Galleries on Camp Bowie, and one day he asked me to help him move. His daughter and my sister were good friends, and so I knew Ron and Deborah and knew his daughter. And so when we were moving, he was moving to Sundance Square, which is an area the Bass family had renovated. Sure. And he moved into a building there on Main Street, and I was helping him move, and he said, "Be careful with that painting. That's a Charlie Russell original. It's $250,000.
Wow.
And at that time, I didn't have any idea that you could even buy Charlie Russell. I thought they were all in museums and that there was no market for that type of art. So after that, I asked Ron if I could go work for him. He said, "I can't afford to hire you." And I went by and interviewed 3 or 4 different times. Finally, he said, "Okay, you can work on commission only. If you want to work for me, that's okay." And at that time, I was single, and I thought, this might work out. I can work on commissions, and I didn't have a lot of expenses, except for I was living at home at the time, and they say that living at home, the rent's cheap, but the advice is expensive, and that's kind of was true for me. But anyway, I went to work for Ron, and then he was such a great mentor. He knew a lot about art. He had been a banker before. He'd also gone to TCU, and so I worked for him for 5 years, and then in 1985, he moved to the Crescent, and that's when I moved to Dallas. And then in '86, I got married, and then I told my parents I was going to start my own gallery, and my dad thought I'd lost it.
And that was a tough time to start a gallery. So
it was not an easy time, no, because we'd gone through the savings and loan crisis. We'd gone through a lot of, they were having these big auctions for them. All these savings and loans had bought a lot of great art, and several banks had bought great art. So I had a friend that I'd gone to TCU with, and he had a sign on his door that said investments. He'd inherited a lot of money, and I thought, well, maybe he might want to invest in art. So we would go to these FDIC auctions, and he'd put up the money. I would buy the art, and then I would go to art fairs in LA and San Francisco and Chicago and sell the art there, because those economies were still doing just fine. So,
that's incredible. What a great legacy.
Well, it was fun. It was tough, but it was fun.
All right, let's pull up your website, and as we scroll on the website, let's talk about the kinds of art that you're working with these days.
Okay. Well, I started out selling just anything I could sell, and all these savings and loan had French art and American art. Well, I was doing an art fair in Charlotte, and it was called the Mint Museum Show. And while I was there, this lady came over to my booth and said, "You've got just a hodgepodge of art, don't you? You need to specialize." She specialized in early American antique furniture. And she said, "You need to find a specialty." She said, "Don't y'all have any good Texas artists?" So I got back to Dallas and I started researching the artists, and I thought, wow, we had some great Texas artists. And so I thought, that's going to be my niche. I'm going to specialize in early Texas art. And so we started exhibiting them. And then in 1996, I was approached by one of my clients about starting an auction. We started at the MAC, and had the first auction there.
No
So,
kidding. And was it an instant hit?
it was. I was shocked. We had 125 lots, and we had a huge crowd. The MAC was just standing room only. People were packed in there, and we sold everything. Every lot sold, and it was exciting. And
Incredible.
now, yes, it was fun.
All right, David, you have some big events coming up. I want to pull up this page off of your website so you can talk about the events and the kinds of arts that you'll be profiling.
Okay. Well, this first one we're looking at is by Olin Travis, and he was born in Dallas in 1888. He studied at the Dallas Art Institute. He went to Chicago to study at the Chicago Art Institute, and he was there from 1910 to about 1913. And he loved Chicago. He loved downtown Chicago. He loved the atmosphere. And this is a painting that he did after he went back to Chicago in 1961. And this has been in the family since it was painted. His son, David Travis, owned the painting, and then he left it to his daughter, who lived up in Ruidoso, New Mexico. And she called me this last summer and said, we've had all these fires up here in Ruidoso, and I've got this valuable art, and I think I want to sell it because I'm worried. She said, I didn't get affected by them, but the fires were within, 100 feet of my house.
Right.
So she thought, I don't want to jeopardize this painting and have it get lost and caught up in a fire. So she consigned that particular painting. And this next one is by Jerry Bywaters, who's a very well-known early Dallas painter. His family was from Paris, Texas, in Clarksville area, and they moved to Dallas back when he was born in 1906, and they moved to Dallas when he was 10 years old for the schools, and they moved to Highland Park.
Wow.
And then he went to SMU and graduated from there. And then the next painting is by Ben Colwell, and he was our Texas abstract expressionist artist. He was friends with Jackson Pollock, and you can see the Jackson Pollock influence. Believe it or not, that painting was done in the 1951. Wow. So that was pretty cutting edge for the early 1950s in Texas.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. Your knowledge of the art is...
Well, I love what I do, and I enjoy my clients and the people, and the art is fun. And these are all, early... people think of Texas art as being cowboys and Indians and Western art, but you can see from these photographs that it's a good variety. And these artists were influenced by other artists, and they came back and I found their own identifiable style of painting here in Texas.
And David, you brought a few
I did. I brought this Jerry Bywaters, who we talked about earlier. After he graduated from SMU, he and Ralph Roundtree wanted to go to Paris and see some of the masters like Claude Monet and Vincent van Gogh and Renoir, Auguste Renoir. And so they took a train from Dallas to New York. And from New York, they took a boat over to Europe and spent about 6 months over there studying some of the masters. Well, when he came back in 1928, he did this scene of downtown New York, and it's got great light and great color. And of course, you can see some of the influence of some of the impressionists that he saw over in Europe. And this is a real early example of Mr. Bywaters' work. And he was very active in the art scene. He taught at SMU for 35 years. He was director of the Dallas Art Museum for 28 years, and he retired in the early 70s, but he left us a legacy of great art and great paintings. In fact, you can see some of his paintings at the Dallas Museum of Art and at SMU at the Meadows Museum.
Kidding. All right, David, you have some more?
Yeah, this was a painting that I got from a lady whose father commissioned this painting. They had a hunting cabin at Little Sandy out in East Texas. And Mr. Bassett, his uncle, Tom Moore, was a member at Little Sandy and had a house out there. And so Bassett would go out and paint ducks. And Clint Murkison in 1936 was building a big mansion out here in North Dallas where Bent Tree Country Club is. He bought 300 acres of land, and he started construction of his 25,000 square foot home. Wow. Well, he wanted Revo Bassett to paint murals in his big ballroom, and this ballroom is just phenomenal. It's got a bar in the middle, it's got an orchestra pit upstairs, and I can just imagine a scene out of Giant, all these rich oil and gas guys drinking bourbon and dancing. But anyway, he wanted Bassett to do all the wildlife in North Texas on the north wall, all the wildlife in West Texas on the west wall, and he did these almost 70 to 80 foot murals in this ballroom, and he ended up becoming pretty famous from that commission. And so everybody that was in the oil business in Texas wanted a Revo Bassett. In fact, if you go to the Petroleum Club today, you'll see several Bassetts hanging in the Petroleum Club. But this is a painting he did at Little Sandy, and it's kind of indicative of what he was known for, mostly the mallards and the different type of duck species. But it's an oil on board, and it has been in the same family since 1948 as when it was commissioned.
Incredible. And you have one more.
And then one more is a little more abstract, but this is by Robert Pruser, and he was a very well-known artist out of Houston, Texas. And this is what was happening after World War II. You had the abstract expressionists like Jackson Pollock and Helen Frankenthaler, and they were introducing different new forms of art. You know, up to that time, it was more traditional and regional, and then these artists started playing with paint. You know, Jackson Pollock was throwing the paint on the canvas, and this artist, Robert Pruser, had been in New York and knew Jackson Pollock and was very much influenced by him. And this is what was happening in Texas after World War II in the late 40s and early 50s. And it was very cutting edge for that time frame, but and these artists had a hard time selling their art back in those days.
Well, do you get excited like a kid in a candy store when somebody comes to you with a rare piece of art?
Oh, yes. I love what I do, and I look forward to getting in. I get calls daily about going into someone's home or getting, you know, the estate and looking at the collection. And sometimes there does, but you never know. So you go and look. And so
what's one of your favorite stories of going into somebody's home and say, oh my God, you have a blank?
Well, one of the favorite stories was during, the riots that we had here. I can't remember, it was several years ago. A lady called me and she said, my grandfather had an office in downtown Dallas and he has a bunch of really great art, and somebody broke in during that time and we're worried that the art could have gotten damaged. It did not. So they called, and I walked over there and went into this man's office, and he had a Charles Russell painting that was 28 inches by 36 inches. It was huge. It was called The Buffalo Hunt, and it was the most amazing painting I think I'd ever seen. And it ended up, I brokered the painting to a collector up in Montana, and that was one of the ones that brought me to my knees.
That's amazing. You have great stories. Listen, we're almost out of time, so final thoughts. What would you like to tell the person who's, you know, thinking about coming to one of your events and perhaps bringing a painting home?
Well, my main goal was to make art accessible to everybody. And we have an auction on Saturday, this Saturday, the 25th. It starts at 10 o'clock, but we have paintings that are $200, and we have pieces that are up to $200,000. But I don't want people to be intimidated. I want people to come in and feel comfortable. We've got Rodeo Goat's going to cater it. We've got an open bar. I want people to relax and look at the art and enjoy. They don't even need to buy anything. It might be an educational process for them.
Yes.
But I want good art to be accessible for everybody, and they don't have to buy prints and posters. They can buy something original that's nice for under $1,000.
I love it. I love it. David, thank you for sharing your heart and your wisdom with us. We're going to end with his website, which is daviddike.com. The great David Dike. Thanks for coming.
Well, Jeff, thank you. Enjoyed it.
That's it
Thank
for
you.
now. We'll see you next time.